Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for tonight's screening of Drunken Birds. We hope you enjoyed the film. My name is Jason Anderson, as you may know, because I might have introduced this film, and I am the director of programming here at the festival, and I'm thrilled to be joined for this post-screening session by our guest, Sara Mishara, who is both the cinematographer of Drunken Birds and the film's co-writer with director Ivan Grbovic. So thanks, Sara, for making time for us. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You were joining us from mere feet, to use the imperial measurement, mere feet away from the Grand Canyon. So thanks for and I was also really, really thrilled that we got to play Drunken Birds on the big screen here at the festival as part of our in-person part of the hybrid, because this, I mean, it is a gorgeous film. And and just to introduce Sara a little more to the audience, I mean, she's shot some of my very favorite films that we played at the festival over the years, and just, I mean, really extraordinary cinematographer, and of course the writing too. But yeah, and I guess, I mean, we'd love, first of all, just to hear about the kind of process. I mean, because Drunken Birds has this kind of so many images with so much impact, and I'm just curious about how that process begins. You know, if you're working with Ivan or working with Stéphane Lafleur or Maxime Giroux, like, how does this kind of, would you start to sort of talk about, like, what are going to be some of these key images? Because I'm sure sometimes there are things that are in your minds from the beginning, and that other stuff is just going to be stuff that kind of happens, you know, with the kismet of filmmaking.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always start with even though we've already read the script, obviously, we always start with the script read. Every director I work with, you know, we start with the script read and we read scene by scene, and we just talk. And sometimes there's images that, you know, that the director already has in their heads, you know, for certain scenes or certain moments. Sometimes I have ideas. Like we kind of have this real open back and forth brainstorming session over the script that takes place over a few days. And that's when we kind of, like, I feel like slowly there's like some light lines are drawn in the visual world of, like, you know, what are some images that we already have? What are some question marks we have? You know, in the case of Drunken Birds, both Ivan and I, but I would say, you know, him to a fuller degree, has always loved films that really transport you and really have like an epic ambition in the image. And when we wrote the script, we really had that as a goal, where, you know, it was really like we're using the visual medium to its fullest for every scene as much as we can. So we did that in the writing process. And I think after that, we sort of knew that we were going to do like you know, because this film takes place on a farm, anyone who loves movie making probably has seen or heard of Days of Heaven, which is a film where they really shot at sunrise and sundown to kind of mimic the times that the people, you know, work when they're getting up and coming home, that work on farms. And so there's certain things like that we knew we wanted to do. So that, for instance, dictated a lot of the images in this film, where we truly did shoot most of the farm scenes, except when they're working. But when they're home, we shot everything mostly at sundown, but sometimes at sunrise too. So that was something that we knew from the get-go. And then, you know, a lot of it is like shared experiences, film ideas. I usually, you know, I have a big photography book collection. I usually, you know, have some photographer or some image or something that comes to mind. And then it's like really, you know, a game of catch, where we're throwing the ball back and forth, and like, you see what sticks, you see what, you know, what feels right, what doesn't feel right. With Stéphane Lafleur, I just finished an amazing film with him that I'm so excited to show to the world. But we did a movie that has a bit of a sci-fi side to it, and we both knew that we wanted to do an analog sci-fi movie, and that was our jumping off point. And then you just, you know, you look for references, and you know, the beginning, yeah, it's really like a dialogue, I would say.
And it's great. I mean, especially, and this is your second movie kind of shooting and co-writing with Ivan after Romeo Owens. And so, I mean, what's been special about this partnership? And kind of like, was it, I mean, and it was this actually like a second part to my question was this a film you talked about for a long time before kind of getting to it? Or was it, I mean, what was the process of sort of beginning this film together?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, the seed of the film came from an experience that Ivan had in Quebec. And, you know, we're as filmmakers always out looking for these sort of magical poetic moments in real life that then inform, you know, what we are inspired by and write. And I think was traveling through a small town in Quebec, and on Sunday morning he saw in a foggy town, a few hundred Mexican workers, foreign workers that I guess it was their day off, and they were coming into town to do, their shopping and stuff like that. Very surreal image, and that piqued his curiosity, and it started him on, just a sort of a voyage of like, what is this? What are the stories of these people? And then when we started writing, we both have this theme of, I guess, people who come from other countries to Canada. We're both, very much attached to the immigrant theme in all of our writing. And I think in this one, we sort of had this idea of this act of like pure heroism, which is, leaving. We're not talking about the main character of the film, but in general, these, most of these men that come out who leave their families for 6, 8, whatever, 9 months out of the year, and work in very extreme conditions, 12-hour days, 6, 7 days a week, and there was something just very poetic and ambitious and epic about that tale. And I think we were both very inspired by that. And that was sort of the jumping off point. And then it was like, what are the relationships of all these people surrounding, the farmers, the daughter, like all these things. And we sort of started building each character, and really wanted to write a film together that would sort of keep the audience really actively involved in the creative process when they're watching the film. So not, sort of not like giving you all the cues and everything, but giving you some clues that you can kind of, build on. So yeah.
I was just thinking about how this is a film. And certainly, I mean, as a sort of theme, you're sort of touching on this sort of idea, like, what does it mean to have this sort of globalized economy? And what does it mean to have all these people from everywhere, kind of crisscrossing as they do because of labor, because of economics, all these sorts of things that happen. And I think as a result, I mean, the film has just had such an incredible sort of density of sort of character and story and place. Like it just, I mean, it's amazing once you start to kind of go in that route, you kind of do develop this kind of like crazy microcosm that says, you do like, I mean, the world does sort of feel like it converges somehow on this farm with these people, like that you feel the sort of burden of this entire apparatus. This, I mean, kind of comes down, the weight is there for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was that definitely, I think that, I'm personally very fascinated by the human aspect of, I guess, the global economy and our interdependencies, and how, we are now living in such proximity, whether we realize it or not, and dependent on so many different people from so many different places. And that's something that the human aspect of that and the emotional aspect of that is something that's quite fascinating to me. And that's a theme. I guess both of us sort of have these themes that we've been developing, on the side, and they kind of converged in this movie.
And so what was it? I mean, was it difficult? I mean, one thing that was difficult to talk about was just like that shift the film does. I mean, certainly there's a shift in kind of timeline, the sort of non-linear structure as you sort of go back and forth across these sorts of, experiences, but also just that slide between this really kind of, the naturalism, the sort of the kind of raw reality of what's happening, and then this more magic realist. I mean, was it tough to sort of figure out how that slide was going to take, or kind of the balance, so you're kind of not tipping into I guess the danger of like whimsy or just too much of that kind of fantasy element? It is certainly a little can go a long way.
Yes, no, you're right. And I think, we both knew we didn't want to do a realistic sort of think piece journalistic movie. But then you're right, how, you need to find that balance where you're keeping your audience engaged with the story. But also trying, for me, what magical realism really is just, you're sort of flipping into the mind's eye of characters. That's what it is. That's what it represents to me. So it is magical in a way, but in a way, it's also just like like in poetry or whatever, where you have a phrase that is using to describe an emotion or something like that. For me, that's what magical realism is. And so, we're weaving in a lot of this into the script, and then afterwards, obviously through rereading it and making sure we had to whittle it down and make sure and vice versa. Like there was some moments that we found were way too documentary feeling, and finding that balance of like being true to what the reality is, but without we weren't trying to make sort of a social commentary film, neither, but we also wanted to stay true to, as much as we could, to what the reality was. And that was a very fine line. We had a lot of conversations about that. And, I would say in both directions, and so up until the very end in the writing process and in the shooting process. And I would say that, a lot of that, one of the things that contributed to that is we were originally going to shoot on a real farm. And I mean, the actual harvesting is, on a real farm during a real harvest. But when we went to visit these farms, there was something much more bleak and industrial, and you really felt the machinery behind it. And we were like, oh, this is too realistic. Like, this is not what we're trying to do. We want to make something that's cinematic. And this is going to feel like, just a big sort of, criticism of, the global economy and all that. Like, we didn't want to evoke that. So we decided to build our own sort of, the house where they live, and also where the workers live. All that is something that we constructed finally, using a jumping off point of what we saw, but doing something that felt a little bit more personal and less industrial. Because the real, the real farms, most of them, the place where the workers live feel really like, work camps or prisons, or, they're not, there's not a lot of charm to them. So we were trying to back.
I was going to ask about that too. I mean, you just spent a long time kind of researching and sort of looking what that, and because I know, because a lot of Canadians just have no idea really what these spaces are like, what these lives are like. Certainly during the pandemic, when people were getting ill and those places were very hard hit. I mean, certainly it's probably the first time a lot of people even considered, what life is like in these spaces.
I mean, it's a pretty, it is like sort of parallel to this movie. It's a pretty harsh, it is a pretty harsh reality. We have, you'll have one family, with father, wife, and a few kids living on this, in this big house. And then somewhere way in the back, far away from them, there'll be sort of an army barrack type situation that can house, it can be 20 to, 200 men, and they live, they don't have their own room. Like, they live in these kind of, I mean, to me, they really feel like kind of military type situations where, they've shared rooms and shared showers and all that sort of thing. And they spend, they really do spend like 8 months a year living there, working every day. And it's pretty intense, when you think about how we've made this, we've sort of created this loophole where we have foreign workers coming here, but don't really have a status, when they're here, or don't have the same rights and the same privileges as people, as Canadians, and are paid lesser wages, under the guise of sort of, it's a win-win situation for everyone. The reality is it's troubling. When you actually go out there, it feels very uncomfortable, even though, everyone is very sweet. The farmers are nice. There's no animosity or any kind of ill feelings. And it feels like everyone is there because they want to be there. But there's definitely, the human price that we have to pay to sort of keep our big industrial farms alive is a big one. And also, the thing that I discovered in all this research is that farming used to be this rural sort of, hand to mouth mentality where, you would live off of what you were doing. It wasn't a business. Now farming has really become a business. And I think that farmers also expect to, gain more profit and kind of build a certain kind of empire when they're doing farming. So it's also the actual business of farming, I think, has really changed. And maybe that's something that we don't realize as much when we're, buying our carton of milk with the cute, cow in the field over it or whatever. The reality is that they've become these very, huge, very complex businesses. And most farmers now don't actually do a lot of physical labor. They're more, managing these huge teams of foreign workers.
Yeah, exactly. That we have these ideas of what goes on in the sort of agricultural world, but it's like it's globalized and mechanized and kind of industrialized like everything else about the way we live. Exactly. Yeah. And it's sort of like definitely it's fascinating to sort of think about that, but also just how the film plays with that, that the kind of that rural space, that kind of what where that world is, and the kind of like almost sort of like Fantasyland Montreal, like just where you just have this like incredible, like it must be exciting to kind of have the opportunity to sort of turn to kind of present a Montreal like that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely strange when you live somewhere. I think it's like the hardest thing to, sometimes it can be the hardest thing to find, you know, a unique perspective in it. And but we definitely, that was also, yes, a goal was to, you know, try to bring a little magic into the moments that we spend in the city, for sure.
It's like the Montreal, it's like you went to like it's like the Vegas Strip version of Montreal.
Exactly.
If you could create that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, there is a lot of that, you know, with the Formula One. You know, there is a lot of that that goes on, obviously not in the past few years, but that is one of those weird things where suddenly, you know, the city becomes Vegas for a long weekend or however long the Formula One lasts. So
Well, it's great, and I think we have to let you go. We're so appreciative for the time, but I'd love to hear. I mean, so I mean, the Stefan Lafleur's movie is the next one up for you.
yes, yeah, we just I just finished shooting that one, and I'm about to shoot another an English language film with Maxime G called In Cold Light this coming spring. So I'm kind of sandwiched between my two directors. And yeah, but yeah, Stefan Lafleur is sort of a sci-fi comedy, dramedy, I would have to call it, but it's going to be, yeah, pure joy. It'll be a fun one.
Oh, that's great. I'm just, and yes, and it's so amazing that you've had these relationships and these collaborations ongoing. I mean, there really have been so many remarkable films coming from them, and it's great to see that you kind of you keep coming back to that well together. It's great to see.
Yes. Well, enjoy the festival.
Thank you so much, and yeah, and thanks to everyone for being here for Drunken Birds, and we thanks for coming to the festival too. We got movies running on the platform until March the 13th, and
Yes.
thanks again.
The theaters keep going.
Yes.